Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. How's it coming through? Bonjour, bonjour. 1, 2, 3. How's that, Mark?
Go ahead.
Hi, just doing a sound check.
We can hear you.
Great, thank you, Kelly.
How's my audio, Kel? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Terrific. I like the hearth in the background there. What do you got on there?
It's my mantle.
We've learned so much about each other's homes over the last while. I live on a street. You can see I just sit here on the street the whole time, and it's been fun the last 19 months. Yeah.
Different for sure.
Morning.
Good morning. How you doing, Matt?
Good. I'm candied out. If anyone wants extra candies, I will gladly deliver.
That's right. I love it.
I'll take it in about a week.
Well, when we get back to City Hall life, and Councillor Kitts has never really truly experienced when we're around the office environment. We always have chocolates on my desk. Robin always has some little candies. Jeff sampled a couple, but always pop by when we get back to normal.
Do you remember in the before times, and we would have like that potluck in the PN room,
Yes.
right?
Except in the PN room, now it's going to be the new ward office for the new ward. So goodbye in the PN room.
What?
Well, I got to put it somewhere. I was always told this back in like years and years ago. They had to find a new spot for a new if they ever had to. That would be the natural room for a new I guess it makes sense. It's got to go somewhere.
The offices.
We'll have to ask Caitlin about that. I see
Yeah.
Caitlin's. I'm not convinced we're leaving that in the PN room.
The facilities team is working hard to find an even better option.
I started a debate. Yes. Go to Twitter. I'm going to Twitter right now. All right.
There's some space in the 311 office, I think.
There you go. I'm sure we'll figure something out.
Let's not put them in a bunker where they can't see the outside world. Come on now.
Let's all sacrifice one room of our offices and we can parcel them together. No takers? No. Okay. So I probably should share this thing at some point. It is now 9:31. I'm looking around. I think we do have a level of quorum. I see Kelly shaking her head, so I think we're okay. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Transportation Committee. Before we proceed, we'll just do a quick roll call and remind everyone we need a minimum of 6 members present to maintain quorum. So Kelly?
Councillor Luloff,
I'm present.
Councillor Dudas. Good morning. Councillor El Shantiri,
Present.
Councillor Deans. Don't see her yet. Councillor Fleury,
Good morning.
Councillor Menard,
Morning.
Councillor Kitts. Here. Councillor DeRuse,
Here.
Councillor Hubley,
Here.
Vice Chair Leeper,
Good morning.
and Chair.
Well, good morning. Beautiful sunny day today. Don't check tomorrow's weather. It's not quite as good. Might be snow. I'm looking here. There's no regrets, no declarations of interest. Confirmation of the minutes, October 6, 2021.
Confirmed.
Thank you very much in that
Right.
raspy voice. Communications, you see it's part of the package, speed limit reductions via council reports. We have 3 items on today's agenda. The first item is the road activity bylaw phase 2 amendments. We do have, and I'm just going to double check here. We do actually have 3 delegations, as well as we do have Councillor who has direction to staff as well on this one. So we'll go back to item number 1. I'm just going to check on item number 2, Transportation Committee inquiries and motions, period ending October 15th, 2021. Is this item there's no presentations, delegations, or correspondence on this specific item. If this doesn't need to be held, is this item carried?
Mr. Chair, I do have a question to staff on one of the periods for one inquiry that dates back to 2015.
Would it be a brief question, or is it something I should hold? Just
It's very brief. It's in relations to MQS. I was told that this was in reference to snow clearing at schools. I was told it was going to come back ahead of the 2022 budget. So here we are on Wednesday, and I wonder how that fits in. So I don't know.
you know what? I'll just hold the item, Councillor, and we'll come right back to that one.
Okay.
Item number 3. Don't see a lot of controversy on this one. Speed reduction of Kirkwood Avenue between Maribel Road and Carling Avenue, and the extension of the 60-kilometer-an-hour speed limit zone on Riverside Drive. No presentations, no delegations, and no correspondence. If no need to hold this, is this item carried?
Very.
Great, thank you. And keep me in line here, Kel. I believe there's 2 additional items that we're looking to add to the agenda. Would that be correct? Great. Would it be appropriate at this time that, because it does require committee to add this onto the agenda, that we put those on the screen and see if they can be added?
Give me one.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Vice Chair Leeper, for looking to get this onto today's agenda. It's maybe just briefly introduce what it is, and if we're good to add it to the agenda, we'll do that. And then if there's no controversy on it, we can gladly approve it and save us from going back to it again.
Yeah, I think the whereases make it fairly clear. There's some warranted crossing guards for which there is no funding. There is funding that's available within the budget, however. So I'll just go straight to the therefore be it resolved that the Transportation Committee recommend Council approve the implementation of the 8 new warranted school crossing guard locations for the remainder of the 2021 budget year, with the one-time cost of $15,000 to be funded from the Traffic Services 2021 Adult School Crossing Guard Program.
Terrific. Can this item be added to the agenda?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. And does this item need to be held? I see Councilor Menard has his hand. Is it a brief one, Sean, or is it?
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, it is. It doesn't need to be held. I'm absolutely in favor of it. Of course, I just wanted to know timing. So when does it mean that they would be in place? I saw previously it would be January 2022. Is that what we're looking at, or will this be earlier than that?
Great. Phil's here. He'll answer that. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. So if this gets approved today and it gets approved at Council, we would work with the Ottawa Safety Council to have the card installed as soon as possible. So this will provide funding between now and the end of the year. And then next year, it'll just continue with the funding that's subject to approval of the budget.
Okay, so it could be implemented this year then, this calendar.
I would expect in a couple of weeks. We're going to work with the Safety Council to try to expedite their hiring of the 8 guards.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair.
Great, thank you. Oh, Councillor Deans has her hand up as well. Yes.
Sorry, not wanting to prolong this, but the motion says one-time cost of $15,000. It doesn't sound like a one-time cost to me. It sounds like it will continue, but this is only a part-year cost for a little tiny bit of 2021. So what's the actual cost?
Yeah, so the actual cost is about $12,000 per year, and that's in the. It's going to be in the budget for next year. We recommend 10 new locations per year. So the actual funding will be done through that. This is basically to bridge that gap between now and January 1st.
$12,000 per year per guard?
Yes.
Okay, so the actual cost is 12 times 8.
Yeah, and that's going to be in the budget. This is basically to deal with the November, December where there's no funding.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Super briefly,
you know what?
Chair.
I'm going to put it back on the
No,
agenda.
I promise you, it's very, very short, and it'll be done. I just want
All right.
just if you can read out the intersections, just so the members of the public know where they're going. That's it.
Yeah, I'm gonna hold it and put it back on the agenda, just to be fair, because I can see other people's faces right now, and it's gonna get prolonged. So it's on the agenda. We'll circle back around. We do have one more item that we have to try to add to the agenda. And I'll get to Kelly once again, the fabulous Kelly, to put it on the screen. Right. And this is a little bit of a belt and suspenders thing, my understanding. And I think it's Councillor Leeper that is doing this one.
Thanks. I will actually just read out quickly the whereases, if I may.
Please. Thank you.
Whereas Groupe Lépine has approached the City of Ottawa to undertake asphalt and landscaping improvements to McGarry Terrace in lieu of the payment of fees related to their development to 1024 McGarry Terrace in Ward 22, and whereas city staff reviewed the city's resurfacing and construction schedule and noted that there are no plans to resurface or reconstruct McGarry Terrace, and with the current asphalt conditions, this would be an improvement to the street, whereas Groupe Lépine has agreed to pay the cost of the resurfacing and additional landscaping works on McGarry Terrace, estimated at approximately $134,000 in exchange for the waiving of temporary encroachment fees and road cut fees of approximately $100,000 as stipulated in Bylaw 2003-46 and Bylaw 2003-445, whereas Groupe Lépine would be required to remit payment for any interest accrued on the account up to the day that a construction agreement is executed. Therefore, be it resolved that Council approve the waiving of all encroachment and road cut permit fees under Bylaws 2003-46, 2003-446 related to this site, anticipated to be a revenue loss of approximately $100,000, contingent on the execution of a construction agreement between the City of Ottawa and Groupe Lépine for the above works at a scope to be finalized at the General Manager, Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development's discretion.
Terrific, thank you. And I have checked with staff. It's no way bonusing or anything like that. This is all staff supported. So can this item be added to the agenda?
Yes.
And is this item carried?
Yes.
Terrific. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. And we'll go back to item number 1. Great. And we'll just wait for the staff presentation. Great. I believe we have Jacob and Brittany presenting from staff today. And then, as mentioned, we do have 3 delegations, as well as prior to the delegations, I believe that there is Councillor Hubley has direction to staff. We'll get that read out. So that's the order that this will go in. Great.
Mr. Chair, I too have a direction.
Okay, I haven't seen it yet. Have you worked with staff on this?
Yeah, all weekend long, Court Curry and I have been going back and forth, and as early as this morning again to finalize.
Terrific. Okay, thank you. So on to staff.
Good morning, Chair and Transportation Committee. On behalf of the Right-of-Way, Heritage and Urban Design Department, alongside my colleague, Brittany McGrath from Traffic Services, we will be presenting the Road Activity Bylaw Review Phase 2 report. We are present here today with other project representatives from Right-of-Way, Heritage and Urban Design, Infrastructure Services, and Traffic Services. In this presentation, I will provide the context for the proposed recommendations themselves, and then briefly describe the consultation conducted as part of this report. Next slide, please. This report recommends changes to the Road Activity Bylaw. This bylaw regulates work that occurs in the city's right-of-way and roads, with the objective of coordinating works that occur in the city's right-of-way, mitigating impacts to mobility that may occur from when work is conducted in the right-of-way, and protecting the integrity of the city's infrastructure assets. The right-of-way bylaw has been in need of review as it was first implemented back in 2003, and a complete review has not been conducted since that time. Turning to why this review was pursued at this time, we have the following reasons. We actually completed phase 1 of this update, and it was approved in April 2019 and went into effect in July 2019. That phase of this review focused on regulatory changes for road cut permits, the applicability of paid and degradation fees, and the resurfacing requirements for road cuts associated with development. In this phase, we are building on those changes. The focus areas for this review include regulatory changes to temporary construction encroachments, a fee review for permits issued under this bylaw, and changes to business processes so that we can accommodate long-term increases in permit request volumes, increases in complexity of work in the right-of-way, and to better manage right-of-way work associated with utilities. Next slide, please. This review contains 3 parts: a bylaw review associated with moving temporary construction encroachment permits from the encroachments bylaw to the road activity bylaw, business process changes, and a comprehensive fee review, and a review to augment requirements for work in the right-of-way. Our objectives here are to improve the management of the work to minimize disruptions to mobility in the right-of-way, ensure the quality restoration following cuts into the city's roads, and to update and streamline business processes to more effectively issue and administer permits. Next slide, please. Flowing from our review and goals, we have the following recommendations. 1, updating the fees to increase staff resources to maintain consistent service year-round and to implement the changes listed in this report. 2, changing the regulations for temporary construction encroachment permits. So these are permits for when construction occupies parts of the right-of-way. And 3, changing the rules for how the road cut resurfacing will be required. And 4, implementing a process of development review to consider the impacts to the right-of-way during construction, or what we'll call constructability in this presentation, and my colleague Brittany McGrath will explain in a moment. We're also requesting the addition of a total of 10 new full-time equivalent positions, all paid for out of the updated fees in this report in the following areas: right-of-way permit office, the right-of-way inspections team, traffic services, and the financial services unit. We're proposing that these changes in FTE requests come into effect on January 1st, 2022. With that, I'll pass things off to my colleague Brittany McGrath in Traffic Services to describe the constructability process to consider impacts to the right-of-way during the development review process, and then we'll be back to discuss the other changes in this report.
Thank you, Jacob. Next slide, please. Constructability. Currently, a gap exists between the development application approval and corresponding construction-related mobility impacts, as they are currently identified at time of construction. With increased development and intensification goals, we're putting bigger buildings into a smaller area in line with the city's official plan, which compounds our mobility conflicts. Development is occurring in areas with competing adjacent land development and active transportation facilities. We used to build subdivisions in less populated areas, but as the city continues to grow, new subdivisions are connecting into existing established communities, and our urban roadway network has also changed with complete streets and active transportation facilities stretching the limits of the city-owned right-of-way. There is a desire to manage mobility impacts more proactively, and ultimately, construction is more complex, challenging, and time-consuming to manage, with a greater emphasis on active transportation modes and accessibility standards. Next slide, please. Moving forward. The proposed new constructability process will be facilitated by 2 new construction traffic management specialists in traffic services. This process will be initiated during the development review process by stipulating preliminary construction conditions based on the constraints identified at application submission. In order to create these conditions, staff will lead council and community stakeholder reviews as required. These conditions will be site-specific, outlining transportation facilities to be maintained and hours of work permitted. These conditions will be cognizant of community impacts, including all modes of transportation, and adjacent land impacts such as businesses, schools, and community centers. This will also be an opportunity to outline any additional public notification requirements. And one of the best parts is the continuity of the staff leading the file from the development review stage through to the completion of construction. Next slide, please. So this is a flow chart of the existing development review process for site plan shown in blue, and the gray is the new proposed constructability process to be included as part of this. So step 1, there's no proposed changes to the pre-application consultation where developers are engaging the city in what could be built on a property parcel. Step 2 is the application submission once they've determined what they'd like to build. And now included in that application will be a preliminary checklist, which is 4 simple questions focused on what space would be needed to physically construct the proposal. So these questions are, does it impact a pedestrian facility, a cyclist facility, a bus facility, or a lane of traffic? Only large phases of the development is intended to be captured here, and any smaller utility connections that are less than 5 business days is not expected to be included at this time. Step 3 is the circulation and notice, and this is where the construction traffic specialists and traffic services will be assigned to help coordinate the special conditions regarding the use of the right-of-way. Step 4 is the issue resolution, where we'll engage the counselor's office and any other adjacent businesses or advocacy groups to work through the challenges expected during construction and finalize the roadway conditions. Step 5 is where the developer will agree to the special conditions provided, and these will be legally binding to the approval. Step 6 is where the city agrees to the conditions as part of the site plan approval. Step 7 is where we used to address constructability, which is basically when someone's on site ready to start digging. And now we will get the detailed plans of how the developer intends to construct in line with the special conditions that are included as part of the approvals. Once we're satisfied with these details, we'll move into step 8, which is where the final road cut, temporary construction encroachments, and road closure permits will be granted. We hope that this new process strikes a balance between the need for construction and development while prioritizing a safe and accessible right-of-way for all users. And at this point, I'll pass the presentation back over to Jacob.
Thank you, Brittany. I'll turn now to the changes proposed for temporary construction encroachment permits. Currently, we have one permit type for all temporary construction encroachment situations. Staff recommend creating two permit types for temporary construction related encroachments. These would be for simple and complex situations. These two permit types would distinguish between the impacts that different scenarios have on the city's right-of-way. The simple permit type would be for short-term work with minor impacts to the right-of-way, such as for a resident putting a waste receptacle at the end of their driveway to facilitate home renovation. The complex permit type would be for temporary construction related encroachments with long-term impacts or with significant impacts to the city's right-of-way, such as for the construction of a new building. There will be different fees for the simple and complex permit types, respectively, discussed later in this presentation. In addition, in this report, staff recommend moving the temporary construction related encroachments from where they currently sit in the encroachments bylaw to the road activity bylaw. This way, the insurance and public notification requirements that apply to road cut permits will also apply to complex temporary construction related encroachments. This will allow for a consistent enforcement regime between the two permit types. Staff also recommend clarifying the general manager's authority to impose conditions on temporary construction related encroachment permits, such as conditions related to construction site cleanliness, aesthetics, or walk-through scaffolding. Next slide, please. In this slide, we have the proposed fees and the proposed changes to those fees organized by permit type. And just as a note, these fees have not been reviewed in a comprehensive way since 2003. On the right-hand side, we have where the fees are proposed to be set. The middle column is what our fees are currently set at, and the left-hand side shows the permit types. And I'm going to make a few notes on where the fee structure has changed in a material way. Starting with the road cut permits, our existing permit allows for up to 10 street segments, where a street segment is defined as a street from intersection to intersection or per building foundation. So currently it's $476 for up to 10 street segments. Our proposed revision is that it would be $236 per street segment. Turning to the temporary construction related encroachment fees, as you can see here, we have split that into two, and the difference in the fee is respective of the different amount of work required for city staff to coordinate and issue that permit, hence the difference between the two. I'll remind you, TC simple is for the simple situation where a resident is renovating their home, and the complex temporary construction related encroachment permit is for developments or a new building. The next fee, where there's a significant change, is for temporary road closures. Currently, city staff do not charge a fee for this permit. It is a complicated fee that requires significant coordination in terms of issuing that permit to temporarily close a road for construction-related purposes, and that permit is proposed to be set at $1,090. Finally, we have the right-of-way damage deposit administration fee. Back in phase 1 of this report, staff imposed a $3,000 fee deposit for road cut permits. At the time, there was no administration fee associated with that $3,000 damage deposit. And what this fee is intended for is for staff to recover the cost of tracking that deposit over several years, as well for the city's right-of-way inspectors to go and review the work to determine if the deposit can be released to the permit holder. As part of this as well, and not shown on this slide, is that we are also proposing to add a 4-year forfeiture period to the right-of-way damage deposit. Therefore, if the deposit has not been requested from the permit holder within 4 years, it will be forfeited to city staff, barring extenuating circumstances. Next slide, please. On this slide, this shows what the fees will be going towards. We'll be going towards funding existing staff program, as well as transitioning to LMS. This is a new application for tracking and processing permits, which will replace the current MAP application, which is antiquated and difficult to work with. These updated fees would allow for funding existing staff, as well as 10 new positions, which would be 3 right-of-way permit clerks in the right-of-way permit office, 3 staff and traffic services, including a construction traffic specialist and a coordinator, as well as 2 staff and right-of-way inspections for a supervisor and a clerk, and 2 staff, 2 coordinators in the financial services unit to help with the administration of permits and fees. And these new positions would work on providing consistent service levels year-round for permit processing and traffic management review, the successful implementation of the constructability review, and inspection oversight and coordination. Next slide, please. This slide shows the proposed changes to the pavement degradation fees. And just before I get into them, I'll just make a note here that these were calculated in a different manner than the processing fees just discussed, because the fee here is charged based on the anticipated long-term decline in the integrity of the road as a result of the road being cut into. So for this purposes, city staff retained KPMG to compare the city's current fee model, which has not been reviewed in a comprehensive way since 2003, with other major Canadian municipalities that charge for the pavement degradation fee in a similar way. As well, KPMG also made recommendations in terms of changing the city's exemptions from having to pay the fees. So under our existing bylaw, we have an exemption for municipal and development works, which KPMG recommended we replace with 2 new exemptions, including works done by or on behalf of the city, as well as resurfacing works exempt. And just to clarify what we mean by resurfacing works exempt, it means that the calculation for the area of the pavement degradation fee will be for the area of the trench, not for the area of the resurfacing, which may be different, as we'll show later in this presentation. So just to go over these fees, the way the fee is generally structured is that the more recently a road was paved or resurfaced, the more expensive it will be to cut into that road. On the left-hand side, we have the current PDF fee rates, which goes for roads that are up to 2 years old at $38.80 per square meter, declining down to $6.45 per square meter for roads that are in excess of 10 years old. Under our current proposed fee structure, we've increased the fees as well as changed the age classifications associated with those ages. So it will now go from roads that are up to 3 years old for $59 per square meter, going down to $16.91 per square meter for roads that are 20 years and older. Next slide, please. This slide shows the changes proposed for the road cut resurfacing policy. In general, it is the R10 standard that applies to resurfacing works at the city. Phase 1 proposed changes to exceed the R10 standard specific to cuts caused by development. So if there are 3 cuts as part of a development or 3 cuts within 12 meters of one another, they need to be resurfaced together under a single patch. In phase 2, we're focusing on cuts caused by utility works. And here we propose 3 changes. One is that for all cuts, regardless of the age of the road, if the cut is within 1 meter of the curb, it needs to be resurfaced to the curb. Specific to cuts into new pavement, so what the city considers new pavement is roads that are 3 years or less since they were last paved or resurfaced. We're proposing 2 new situations in which we would require greater resurfacing. The first would be resurfacing must always be brought to the nearest lane, center line, or curb line. And the second one, as depicted on the diagram on the right hand of this slide, would be for longitudinal and diagonal cuts through multiple lanes of traffic need to be squared off. And as you can see on this diagram, the white rectangle represents the trench, so that would be the cut into the city's road. And because it cuts across multiple lanes of traffic, and we're showing on this diagram that it would be for what is considered new pavement, the patch must exceed it and must be squared off, as you see at right angles in this slide. Next slide, please. Finally, just to make a note on the consultation that was pursued as part of this project. Consultation began with internal departments and external stakeholders going back to December 2020. This consultation was formalized in a consultation plan in early 2021 and included a series of meetings and online materials. Over the summer, we consulted with external stakeholders from GOBA, the NCHCA, UCC, and other industry groups by forming a technical advisory committee. The list of groups invited to participate in the technical advisory committee are provided here, as well as other internal and external groups that were informed of the proposals in this report. The Technical Advisory Committee met in a series of 5 meetings from June 2021 through July 2021. Concurrently, we created and kept updated a project website showing our proposals and presentation materials. With respect to feedback we heard through the Technical Advisory Committee, consistently we heard that with respect to fees for right-of-way permits, increased fees were preferable if that brought timelines down, considering the significant processing times it takes during the busy construction season in terms of issuing permits. Delays to permit issuance create costly delays to project coordination, affecting private parties working within the right-of-way, as well as the city's capital works program. Additionally, stakeholders expressed a desire for any changes to regulations be made available in a clear and accessible format so that parties working within the city's right-of-way would have easy access to the new requirements for when these changes come into effect. Staff proposed that these changes come into effect for January 1st, 2022 to be implemented throughout Q1 2022 to be ready in time for next year's construction season. Subject to any questions, Mr. Chair, this concludes my presentation and I thank you for your time today.
Great, terrific presentation. Thank you for that. And just before we go to our delegations, we do have 2 directions to staff. I now have received Councillor Fleury's, but first we'll deal with, if we can get Councillor Hubley's up on the screen. Kelly, we'll get Councillor Hubley to read that out, and then we'll go to Councillor Fleury if we can have that on the screen after.
Thank you, Chair. It's brief. It says, since the collection of pavement degradation fees, PDFs, was resumed in 2019, the PDF revenues have contributed towards the city's resurfacing program. With the introduction of a new model for PDF as recommended in this report, staff be directed to 1, analyze the projected annual PDF revenues based on the new PDF structure recommended in the staff report. 2, analyze how these fees can be directed within the different wards, the type of maintenance that can be supported through PDF. And 3, review the associated projected delivery methods and management efforts required to implement these, all towards evaluating how the city can best use PDF revenues to maintain its asphalt roadway assets. And finally, 4, report back to the committee by the end of Q1 2022 with the results of this analysis. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you for that, Councillor. And Councillor Fleury, you have your direction, so I'll get you to read that as well. And then after that, we'll proceed to delegations, and then we'll go back to questions to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kelly, I don't know if you, oh, here we go. It's always, okay, so this is about the report that's in front of us, specifically as it relates to degradation. So let me read what's on the screen. So staff are proposing to implement broader asphalt resurfacing requirements on road cuts made by utilities, primarily being that all cuts within 1 meter of a curb or roadway edge be brought to the curb and roadway edge, and that all cuts into the pavement 3 years or less in age be resurfaced to the full width of the affected lane. While this will help maintain the surface rideability of road cuts, staff be directed to continue continuous improvement by 1, monitor the impact and compliance of the new broader resurfacings recommended in the staff report. 2, review if and how broader resurfacing requirements or alternatives could be required on older pavements beyond the 3-year proposed thresholds within the boundaries of the design priority areas and special districts as defined in the new official plan. 3, review if broader resurfacing requirements should be required for extensive longitudinal road cuts that traverse several city blocks. 4, report back to committee by the end of Q1 2023 with the results of the analysis. And further direction, 5, review the R10 standard trench reinstatement detail as part of the 2022 infrastructure service standard review, including the applicability of asphalt sealant on road cut joints.
Terrific, thank you for that. So those are 2 pieces of direction. So we'll speak to the motion now. We have 3 delegations. First one is Catherine Sutherland from the National Capital Heavy Construction Association.
Thank you. My colleague, Steve McKeon, who is here with us today, will speak on behalf of the National Capital Heavy Construction Association.
Perfect, thank you. Hi, Stephen. You have 5 minutes. You're no stranger to this. The floor is yours.
Hi, guys. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to speak today. Like Kathy said, name is Steve McKeon. I'm the president of the NCHCA, and in my spare time, general manager of Econ Construction here in Ottawa. You will have seen by now the NCHCA's previous correspondence regarding the ongoing delays to obtain road cut permits. At the time of writing, our members indicated that it was taking up to 4 to 6 weeks to obtain a road cut permit and up to 10 days for the streamlined process for IS projects, instead of the targeted 24 to 48 hours. This is not a new issue, and it's not COVID related. It is a recurring issue every construction season. As you all know, delayed permits have a serious impact. They hinder progress on vital infrastructure projects, delay subdivision developments, and interfere with our ability to meet our contractual obligations. Projects may, in some cases, be pushed into the following year, in addition to significant downtime costs, delay penalties that may also be levied by project owners. Road cut permit delays also impact the City of Ottawa residents that require road cut permits to effect repairs or have other service requirements. We are very pleased to see that the improvements to the system are coming, and we have received assurances from the right-of-way group that the requested staffing changes will eliminate backlogs and future delays, even during high times at the height of construction season. We expect that the city is aware of the volume requirements going forward as they have their finger on the pulse for the growth and development in the city. We understand that an increase in fees and or new fees that are proposed to cover the cost of additional staff. However, we do find it hard to understand why an essential service with such a high impact is dependent on cost recovery as opposed to service delivery. In closing, the NCHCA fully supports the request for additional staff if it will now and in the future ensure that road cut permits are issued in a timely fashion. We would also like to take a moment to express our thanks and appreciation to the folks of the Right-of-Way Permit Office for their recent efforts to clear up the backlog and reduce delivery times. These are my comments, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. And once again, just thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you very much, Steve and Catherine, for coming out today to speak. I don't see any questions to the delegation, so thank you very much for that. We'll move on to someone that is not a stranger to committee and delegation, Cheryl Parrott. Cheryl, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Hey, good morning, councillors. The Hintonburg Community Association very much supports this bylaw and the increased fee schedule. Hintonburg is seeing new intensification projects every day, and over the last few years, we hear regular construction horror stories from residents abutting these new developments. So neighbors' 100-year-old buildings are being undercut with no structural engineer required until a huge fuss is made and then sitting exposed for months and sometimes years. Excavating neighbors' properties without their permission, their driveways and yards disappearing. Neighboring properties being flooded, grade changes that create flooding. Eaves troughs of huge buildings placed right at the sidewalk, creating hazards in freeze-thaw. Street encroachments for months with no permit or signage, blocking streets for days with no permit, signage, or notice. Road cuts that sink and cars that bottom out as they pass over it. And calling 311 has helped, but it takes a long time. So sometimes it's days before that gets fixed. Unsafe demolition with cars passing by on the street. Roads with so many road cuts that they've deteriorated to the point of being unsafe. And one example is Armstrong Street, which is a city designated cycling route. So yes, we call 311 again and again and again. The standard city response to neighbors when they call about construction damage or encroachment is, this is a civil matter. You'll have to take the owner to small claims court. And that is distressing, and it takes a year or two out of your life. But the city has allowed these permits to be issued and should have foreseen many of the issues that we're dealing with. It's difficult to get an inspector to come out and to have them weigh in. Countless emails and nagging seem to be all that we can do. There's also a significant cost in staff time when complaints have to go up the chain of command in several departments. The community association and the councillor have to put in endless hours to try to avert disasters from happening and are left to deal with the aftermath when they do. There are not enough inspectors, there's little oversight. Plans examiners do not seem to take into consideration the implication on neighboring properties, and no one is there to help when the predictable disaster happens. So we're glad to see that you're increasing staff, but please ensure that the focus is not just on pushing through more applications, but on preventing the disasters we're seeing every day. All departments need to play a role together, whether it's right-of-way and road cuts, PIAD, plans examiners, development approval staff, and building code services. And we have a number of suggestions that would provide some help in controlling the wild west of construction we're experiencing. So require posting of road closure and road encroachment permits, just as you do with building permits. It would save a lot of time checking on queries and complaints. Require mandatory site visit by staff with the builder to assess and document potential problems. Many of them are obvious. For certain sites, require certain modes of construction, i.e. Cutting or line drilling rather than hole ramming at a neighbor's foundation. In areas where adjacent properties could be affected, a documented plan that is stored with the city to protect both the developer and adjacent homeowner alike. Create a damage deposit to protect adjacent properties during construction.
1 minute.
Require proof that designated substances have been removed prior to a demolition permit being issued. Require the developer to provide approximate construction schedules and deadlines to neighbors. Implement fines for sidewalk and road blocking without permits or for unsafe sites. These suggestions would help save you a lot of money and staff time dealing with complaints. And we would be happy to work on further proposals. And just in reaction to the presentation, great, but many projects in our community have no site plan requirement. So that seems to leave them out of this process of the checklist. And it's really important that you coordinate road and building issues rather than the two different streams, which just increases the workload for all of us of having multiple inspectors, multiple complaints.
Time.
Thank you for your time.
Wow, right down to the minute. Terrific. Thank you for that. We appreciate your delegation today, and I think you're echoing some of the points that some council colleagues have. I don't see any questions, so thank you, Cheryl, for coming out, and we'll move on to our third and final delegation. We got Dave Robertson from Bike Ottawa.
Hi, good morning, everyone. After many years, Bike Ottawa is glad to see a review and recommendations to make changes to the road activity bylaw and temporary construction encroachments. Many residents are walking, cycling, and rolling to get around their city during this climate emergency and in a time of unreliable public transportation. Because we live in a rapidly growing city, residents walking, using bicycles, and mobility devices are being blocked at construction sites and by service vehicles with increased frequency. We are concerned that although Bike Ottawa has been part of the fabric of the city since 1984, representing residents that want and need to get around their city by bicycle, we were not consulted on this review. Even more concerning is that consulted stakeholders seem to be those involved in the construction industry, but not those impacted by the construction industry. All that aside, let me go over Bike Ottawa's recommendations. This report sets out ways to improve the regulation of temporary construction encroachments, including bylaw amendments, process improvements, revised processing fees, and additional staff resources. Will these changes really make our city safer and more accessible for people walking and biking? Currently, we commonly see sidewalk and bike lane closed signs and cyclist dismount signs around construction sites. Instead, city staff and construction companies should prioritize the movement of people outside of cars with safe, direct, and accessible detours at every instance. Not doing so impacts the elderly, the infirm, and people carrying children or large items. This is our first recommendation. Let's set up new and clear guidelines for how to set up detours for people walking, using bicycles or mobility devices around these construction detours. How is traffic services going to plan on prioritizing active transportation users? My conversations with staff have revolved around prioritizing car movement first and vulnerable road users secondly, only if there is space on the road for a detour that doesn't impact drivers. Bike Ottawa's second recommendation is that at least one of the 10 of the new full-time employees have a sole focus of ensuring the efficient movement of active transportation users in the application process. To further on the subject of roles for staff, a third recommendation is that changes to the role of the general manager in the new section 28 of the road activity bylaw should always prioritize movement and safety of pedestrians and people using bicycles or other mobility devices. The recommendations contained in this report say that they will have a positive impact on the accessibility and mobility of the city's community of people with disabilities. However, Bike Ottawa does want to point out that there seems to be a focus on the notification of seniors and the disabled of construction in the rights of way. But better than notification is our fourth recommendation, and that is the safe and accessible detour at every construction site, taking into account surface quality, ramps, and helpful signage. It's also worth pointing out that the city's accessibility design standards do not mention bicycles as accessibility devices, of which they are. Finally, we ask how enforcement provisions are going to stop blockages of sidewalks and bicycle facilities in the first place. With the current model, which relies on the public to report, results in poor 311 response time and councillors' energy to try and resolve blockages that impact active transportation users for days, weeks, and sometimes longer, often with no resolution. So our fifth recommendation is that Ottawa look into Montreal's mobility squad model for enforcement. A last comment is about the environmental implications section, which does not seem to take into account the city's climate emergency. A key part of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions in our transportation sector is to reduce the use of cars. The everyday blockages for active transportation users makes getting around without a car dangerous, and this certainly does not help the modal share. We ask Transportation Committee members to seriously consider these recommendations that prioritize the safety of vulnerable road users around construction sites so that everyone may arrive at their destination safely and with maximum ease. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dave. Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. The concerns you've outlined here are some of the ones that I raised with staff in our pre-briefing, and those were good discussions. I'm glad to see some changes coming forward. But my question to you is, can you give some examples of areas that you've seen this occur in the city, and get into some more specifics? You've seen the detailed design the city has put out in terms of examples of when road cuts will take place and how it may affect either a full lane width, for example, and some of the other shared accessibility concerns you've talked about. I have examples in my ward that I could bring out, but I'm just wondering, are there some specifically that you can remember that you want to highlight so that we have examples of not just what this might look like in an optimal design, but what we've been seeing in the city thus far with these types of construction and road permits?
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Menard. you know, these construction blockages are all too common. It's not that there's just an example here and there. They're literally everywhere. I mean, every time I'm out on my bicycle or walking around, there's either signage on a sidewalk or there's a construction site set up with a sidewalk closed sign saying redirecting people to the other side, and then there's probably another construction site on the other side which also has a sidewalk blocked. So I guess some more specifics. Heron Road, which is sort of near my workplace. There's been some work done there recently. There was probably a construction site. They were replacing part of the sidewalk, I guess, in front of my workplace last year. And crews had blocked off the sidewalk completely. And it's not a narrow sidewalk, it's a wide sidewalk, but all the construction staff vehicles were on the sidewalk. They had probably the bus lane and an additional lane also blocked for construction crews. So not only was the bike lane blocked on Heron Road, but the sidewalk was completely blocked, and there was absolutely no way for people to get around. But an important point here is that there was an additional 3 or more car lanes still available for drivers to get by. But there was no one walking or cycling that could get through that area. And there was no advance notice that it was coming up for them to get around. So in this case, my suggestion would be is that what we do is we create a direct and accessible detours. So that would be occupying an additional car lane and setting up either pylons or some type of other construction barrier to make sure that anyone walking or cycling or using a mobility device can see how they are going to get around the construction site. Because too often the detours just redirect you in another direction and you don't know how you're going to get to your destination. So if these construction detours were direct and people could see how they're going to get by with the least amount of effort, that just, it plays into human behavior, because all too often people will see a sign saying construction detour, go this way. And people say, but I just need to get right there. And so what people will often do is either walk through the construction site or they will walk on the road and they will risk their own lives. So it's better that city staff and construction companies plan for human behavior and let's map out the most direct way to get around these construction sites.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Robertson. I appreciate it. There's examples, 1050, 1060 bank in my work. We had to really push hard to get to the ultimate outcome there, where you see that separated lane on the roadway, but that was not the way it was going to be initially. And that is where my concern comes in, is that we have to spend so much time and effort to get to a better optimal solution without having that done initially in terms of accessibility for people who are walking or rolling or biking. So thank you for your delegation. It's appreciated. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Don't go away, Dave. Councillor Kavanaugh has some questions for you as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robertson. And I appreciate the cooperation with Bike Ottawa on these projects. And as you know, it's in my area, it's massive with what's going on with stage 2. And I appreciate the cooperation with Bike Ottawa and their contribution. It's actually Exhibit A in terms of trying to get it right, and it hasn't been right all along, but I think it's getting better. I think that's really important to have eyes on the road for cyclists and pedestrians, and having alternatives set up, particularly for accessibility. So I just wanted, I don't really have a question. I just wanted to make that comment if you wanted to add anything further. But it is important, and I know that Bike Ottawa has been heavily involved in those routes because they're going to be going on for a few more years. So thank you for that.
Okay, thanks for your comments, Councillor. You know, we are very pleased to see some of these changes, but as this is the first time that we've been involved in discussing recommendations, I think it's really important that committee members do consider our recommendations, so that people are prioritized around construction sites. Thank you.
Great. And thank you very much, Dave. And thank you, Councillor. So seeing no more delegations, thank you for coming out, Dave. We'll turn questions to staff. And I don't see any hands. Oh, there we go. Vice Chair Lieber.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hubley has put forward a proposed direction, which I assume staff are willing to take, that will take a look at how some of the pavement degradation fees are going to be used. I had raised this as well in my pre-briefing with staff on this item. Is there the possibility that that review could wind up ensuring that, you know, in for example, wards like Kitchissippi that, as you heard from Cheryl, are heavily intensifying, that the funding might stay in the ward?
For me, if Karina Duclos could answer that question, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, we are in agreement with the direction, and it is part of the analysis we want to see before we move ahead with how we are going to apply those fees back into the community. So at this point, we don't have all the detailed information that how the fees are distributed by ward. So as part of that study, we will come with all the information back to you to share what we find and move forward based on the results.
Okay. So it sounds like it is on the table until we hear it's not then.
Correct.
Fantastic. And then my second question to staff does relate to what Dave was talking about at Bike Ottawa. I'm really pleased to see much earlier involvement by councillors in traffic control plans and the mitigations for construction. You know, I think that we are facing the same situation that councillors in Toronto have been trying to grapple with, which is by the time we see what a construction pedestrian cycling plan looks like, they're already so far down the path and we're a few days away from implementation, as opposed to getting a good idea much sooner. But I don't think the changes that are being proposed today, you know, necessarily create that prioritization on active transportation users. And I'm wondering whether staff consider that their door is open to developing that in the wake of passing these changes, to creating a set of guidelines or policy that would describe how detours are to be accomplished at the policy level, rather than sort of hoping that each councillor will make that decision themselves. Because right now, a lot of this is going to come down to who the councillor is who's being presented with a potential detour, and the degree to which they do or don't want to prioritize those active transportation users.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, so I think that's something that we can look at doing. I mean, when road cut permits come in and we get asked to look at that, we do look at all the modes of transportation, but we can work with our colleagues in right of way to develop some guidelines that would sort of establish that in a document, if that's the direction that you want us to take.
There's some, I don't know how you feel about some of the language that we use in our procurement processes. So for example, the LRTE Stage 2 contract has some great language in it. Enforcement is a bit of an issue that says, look, you know, you can never detour pedestrians more than X number of meters away from their normal path. There always has to be, sorry, how do I put it? If you have a segregated route that is being affected, it has to be replaced with a segregated route. And I would love to get to the point where in our traffic control plans and detours that we have the same very explicit guidelines so that if you're affecting a segregated route, the replacement has to be segregated. If you're, and you know, with the distance beyond which you're not allowed to ask pedestrians to go out of their way. Would that be worth exploring?
Yep, no, I think it would be, and I think what we want to do too is sort of look at best practices, sort of talk to other municipalities in Ontario and even across Canada. We are members of the Transportation Association of Canada, as well as the OTC, so we can do some call outs to see what others do, and then we can come back and bring sort of a comprehensive best practice plan that we would want to consider using here in Ottawa.
Okay. And then last question is on the enforcement of it. Contractors get on site, they've got a job to do, they just want to get it done. They figure a couple hours of not adhering to a detour plan is just fine. It's not if you come across a blockage and can't go on your way. What can you remind me of the resources in this plan that would help us to ensure that TCPs and detour plans are being adhered to?
Yeah, so at a high level, we do have traffic management inspectors that do patrol the roads. Maybe I'll ask Brittany to just sort of go into details in terms of some of the things that they're doing to help address that issue. And I know we do issue fines when we come across things that aren't as per plans, and or even if, I mean, we have some contractors don't issue or get road cut permits. So we, you know, we will fine folks, and we have that ability to do that today. But I'll ask Brittany maybe to go into a bit more detail on that.
Yeah, how will it get better?
Through you, Chair. Thanks, Phil. I mean, what we're really looking to implement is a culture change, right? We want to start addressing the transportation facilities, and in particular, emphasizing the active transportation facilities earlier on in the approval process. And hopefully they're going to be more creative in their solutions once they understand those expectations. And I think, you know, we are sometimes bound by the provincial legislation, right? So construction zones are set out safety-wise, worker safety-wise by the province. So we do struggle a little bit with the balance between the, you know, the Highway Traffic Act and the Ontario traffic manuals and what we want to see in the city. And we can certainly set out some guidelines within the city of how we'd like to see it. You know, the LRT contact about 400 meters for a pedestrian detour. You know, in a lot of urban scenarios, that's 400 meters is even quite far, right? So, you know, what we currently do is we try to review each and every situation individually. And, you know, it's difficult when the buildings have a zero lot line build and we're, you know, stretching the limits of the right of way with active transportation facilities from door to door across. So I think ultimately what this new process is we're trying to implement that culture change of being more active earlier on in the process, and, you know, really providing that emphasis. And it'll also give us that legislative backing once we get to, you know, the boots on the ground of actual physical construction, and we can push back on, you know, what they really need to maintain in those construction zones.
I mean, Brittany, you've always had my back with respect to reacting to situations, Shane and some of the other inspectors as well. But what I would love to get us, and I think this is what Dave is kind of pointing to as well, is to the point where we're better able to proactively address, so that, you know, our inspectors aren't visiting sites on the basis of a councillor complaint after the fact, but that there is more proactive checks to make sure that the plans are being adhered to. Does what we're passing today give you any additional resources to try to be more proactive?
Through you, Chair. Absolutely, it does. That's ultimately what we're trying to do. And, you know, like you, Councillor, we we deal with a lot of fires on the road, right? Of what's happening. And oftentimes we get a lot of pushback from the developer. You know, we hear, how did you think I was going to put the bricks on the outside of the building when it's directly against a sidewalk, right? So like I said, what we're doing with this is we're going to manage those expectations a lot earlier. And my hope, you know, specifically for site plans, is maybe they start designing their buildings around needing to maintain those facilities. So building the foyer last and putting their concrete pump on their own lands instead of trying to stage all of that from the right of way. And, you know, with this new process, because we're going to have time to be, you know, looking at some of these solutions, I'm really, really hopeful that this will help us in the long run of managing those impacts and hopefully avoiding those impacts on the roadway, because they're going to have a more comprehensive plan of how they're going to construct instead of dealing with it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Okay. No worries. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks,
Thanks,
Brittany.
Vice Chair. Councilor Menard.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks to staff for the report and the pre-briefing on this item. That's very helpful. This is a big issue in our ward. We have a lot of issues with, there's two things really. One is the detours that get put in place. Oftentimes we're not seeing as effective or safe detours as we would like. And then the second is around the timing of, you know, reinstatements and how reinstatements are done on the road and in sidewalks and bike lanes. So those are the two big issues in Capital Ward. The inspectors that we have now do a great job. There's just not enough of them. So I'm very pleased with the working relationship with staff, and when they are on the ground, extremely effective. But so I'm happy to see the increase in FTEs that will come, and hopefully that can be targeted, because when we do work with staff in conjunction, it's usually very effective. Some of the questions I have, often when we have road cuts, we will see construction vehicles parking on sidewalks. They degrade them further. Is there a measure to better enforce some of the sidewalk parking, make sure that any damage done to the sidewalks is repaired, perhaps before a deposit is returned?
Councillor to the chair. It's Kevin Lamer here. So I look after the inspection for the road cut inspectors or right-of-way inspectors. So as part of our development process in 2019, we instituted the right-of-way damage deposit. So this is for anything that's outside of a development agreement. As one of the other councillors referred to, there's a lot of development happening. That's like the single semi-detached type units happening in the communities. So that has really helped us. So that is an amount that we take per vertical unit that is actually being approved in, on the site. And as part of that comprehensive review, in addition to the requirements of the road cut itself, the right-of-way damage deposit is actually taken on the builder. So that is something as a comprehensive review for every unit that's built. We're putting that pressure on that builder now to make sure that everything is addressed. So the sod, the sidewalk, the curb, the roads, everything within the right-of-way, where traditionally we had an issue sometimes where the permit holder was in very early, but through the construction of the building, further damage was happening on these particular units, and we didn't have a development agreement or related securities. So we found that since 2019, this has really helped us as far as getting more compliance. We continue to do that. What was introduced in this update was basically an administration fee now for us to administer those going forward. Does that answer your question, Councilor?
It helps to have that piece of information. I guess some of the specifics around this is just there's other infrastructure affected nearby. Oftentimes we're seeing vehicles parked on the sidewalk, as I say. So obviously there's a bylaw enforcement mechanism along with this. And again, when we work with bylaw, they are effective in that way. But sometimes it's too late, and there's already people that have had to go out in the roadway, or the infrastructure gets damaged in advance. So that's the other piece of it. I can move. Do you want to just respond quickly on that, or I can move on?
Yeah, I would say in a situation, if you have a road cut and you're having related construction damage happening outside of the road cut, if that's a fair way to present it, if in a situation, as long as we're aware, we'll be as proactive as we can, especially again, coming from 301 service requests from contractors, whomever, we'll make sure and document that and make sure we build a case to say, yes, it was that contractor that damaged it, that was parked in area B next to the site. As long as we're aware, we'll make sure and build a case to make sure that we do have that particular damage addressed. And of course, ultimately, we do have the bylaw that we can charge if required. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, that does. Thank you. Thank you for that. The scenarios that were produced for us, it's not much that touches on what will happen with road cuts in bike lanes. I'm just wondering about assurances that, you know, when the road cut is done in a bike lane, will it extend the entire length of the bike lane? Are we going to put that provision in place, and that we won't have a new seam running down the middle of the lane, which often creates issues later on?
So what's being presented in this update, what we're looking to do is, we don't always know the width of the actual road cut. You can imagine there's multiple different scenarios that we run into. What we're trying to do as part of our our R10 standard is do a reinstatement based on what is actually excavated. So if that is actually cut through a bicycle lane, that will be just the limits of the road cut. If it does fall within the new proposed change that we're doing, if it's a roadway that's within that's been paved within the last 3 years, we're now looking to go the entire lane width as part of that road cut. Because we have two different scenarios. You have a cut that could go across the roadway, and then you have the longitudinal cuts that go along the roadway the opposite direction. So this is more to address the longitudinal cuts for roadways that are within paved within the last 3 years. For the older asphalts, we're still traditionally staying to the R10 standard, which is just reinstating what it is they actually dug up, unless it's within 1 meter of the curb, which we're hoping that that will help address some of the calls and complaints we've been getting in regards to that transition piece from the road cut to the existing asphalt, regardless if it's a bicycle lane or a travel lane.
Yeah, I think the consideration of our pedestrian lanes, areas where wheelchair users may be using them on reinstatements, people that are biking with thin tires, that there should be a consideration there when moving through those sections. And I wonder if there's a need to have it so that it's it's the entire width of it. It's not just stopping dead stop in the middle of a sidewalk or bike lane, for example, creating a new hazard or seam. That is a consideration I think we need to take seriously. I'll move on, but I do want to highlight that point as something staff should take under direction in terms of looking at how this new bylaw is rolled out. We see a lot of road applications that become incomplete over time. Is there a mechanism to ensure that these are done within approved timelines? I know there's the deposit there, but what authority or mechanism can we use to make sure that they finish when they say they're going to finish in terms of timeliness?
Yeah. Councillor, through the chair, my apologies. Were you speaking in regards to the work that's issued under the road cut permit, or are you referring to the right-of-way damage department as part of the larger development?
No, on the permits that are issued, or on the permits that are issued for road cuts specifically. The timelines associated with them finishing that work. I'm wondering if there's a mechanism to ensure that the timeline is met. If it's not met, what occurs at that time?
I'll defer to my colleague, Rob McLaughlin, just to confirm the timelines for the road cut permit issuance. One moment, please.
Yes, good morning. Through the chair, thank you, Councillor. Effectively, under the road activity bylaw, a permit holder is supposed to be actively working at all times in order to get to a temporary reinstatement. And then from there, under the bylaw, they have 30 days to reinstate to final, subject to, of course, extenuating circumstances such as the weather. So what you'll see is the right-of-way inspectors working actively with the road cut permit holders to make sure that there is work occurring as quickly as possible within the site context that's going on to ensure that a final reinstatement occurs. And then they'll work to, if there are issues in relation to the weather, to make sure that following those weather incidents, whether it must necessarily be moved to the next year, that it's done as quickly as possible come the next season.
Okay, thank you for that. My biggest concern, I guess, with all of this, that I have a lot of, I'm going to support this, and I have a lot of hope with these new inspectors. We're gonna see an improvement. My biggest concern is around the current councillor control that we have now over the process and what's going to change as a result. Because even though it comes late in the process, I still see it and I can push for changes there when I know there's going to be an issue. If I've traveled there, I know that there's going to be a problem. We can push and then work with staff and the developer to change it so that there's safety enhancements. So there's a number of overlapping pieces with that. On site plan, Cheryl Parrott had asked this question, but if the building's not subjected to site plan, will this, I assume there's still a process to inform councillors about this and have a say as part of the process?
Councillor, I'm going to begin, if I may, through the chair, to describe some of the notification requirements that we have under the bylaw. And then from there, I'm going to defer to my colleague Brittany and to speak to the work that they do in relation to working through some of the temporary construction encroachment conditions, as well as the road cut conditions. So from a notification perspective, there always has to be notification to the surrounding residents in relation to the work that's ongoing. And the extent or the advance notice that's required in terms of the time frame depends on the circumstances. So if the road is proposed to be temporarily closed, if buses are proposed to be rerouted, if the sidewalk is to be closed with a detour, or if the work is to take longer than 7 days to complete, then 10 working days notice has to be provided. And that notice has to also be given to the ward councillor. If any of those 4 conditions are not met, then 2 working days notice needs to be provided, not necessarily to your office, for example, but to the surrounding residents, because that signals that it's a lesser impact work, if you will. And those were the changes that were brought in by council in 2019 as part of the first phase of the bylaw review. Now, to speak to working with your office in relation to some of the traffic conditions that go on for either the road cut permit or the temporary construction encroachment permit, I'm going to defer to my colleague Brittany.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So ultimately, Councillor, we still have the tools that we do today on each of those construction projects. So as you know, we're very active with your office and all of the councillors' offices on, providing those conditions and working through some of those challenges, albeit some of them are while they're happening. But I think the constructability framework that we're proposing now is meant to address the most contentious and the highest impact projects, which are historically site plans and subdivisions. And again, I say it again, that the ultimate hope here is looking for that culture change, right? As developers and contractors get more accustomed to having these roadway conditions earlier and planning their projects around these conditions, even the smaller projects, the same companies are going to reach out to us in advance, right? Because they're going to find that it's mutually beneficial. Building permits is in the neighborhood of around 10,000 permits annually, and site plan and subdivision applications are around 300. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a numbers game. We don't have the staff and the resources to get further in depth on each and every building permit.
Okay, but just on I appreciate those answers. Thank you. On the notice to councillors, you mentioned those 4 conditions. Those will be maintained throughout this process with the update that were instituted in 2019. I appreciate those. And so we'll still get, if there is a road closure, if there's a bike lane closure, if there is a sidewalk closure or partial closure, we will still get upfront notification in advance to say, here's the suggested plan. Do we have your concurrence? It's not going to be through delegated authority that it would be held up. We can still say, yeah, you have our concurrence and or you don't, and here's what we need to change in it.
Great. And on that, Councilor Menard, I'll let them respond, but you'll have to go back to the bottom of the board. Sorry about that.
I'm all finished, Chair. Thank you. That's my last question.
Thanks, Sean.
Forgive me, Chair, can I respond to the question? Sorry.
Oh, yes, please do.
Thank you. Just to clarify for the Councillor Chair, those are notification provisions. The permits are issued under delegated authority. Now, to refer back to what my colleague Brittany was saying before, of course, Traffic Services works quite closely with the councillors' offices, being sensitive to the situations as they arise. But it is not a concurrence-based scenario. It's a scenario where notification is provided to the ward councillor as per the bylaw requirements. Now, I will say the one caveat to that is what came about as a result of a motion back at the end of 2019, where if there is a development-related road closure that is to last longer than 20 working days, then staff do require the concurrence of the ward councillor in order to issue the road closure. If not, it would rise to committee for consideration.
Great. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
We have Councillor Fleury and Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for the question, and thank you, staff, for the report. It is not perfect, but it is a huge step in the right direction. I know this is the second phase after some of the work that was done on other areas of our right of way. Rob, my question or team, my question relates to constructability. And I guess there are two items that have not been raised, but that I think are pertinent to the conversation today. The first one being developer X gets the okay with an approved plan, but then, as we know, that industry works on subs of subs of subs of subs, and then ultimately no one owns the site, and there's 30 vehicles parked anywhere and everywhere. So how can we get these plans approved? Brittany's team does, and they protect sidewalk, they protect laneways for buses and cycling infrastructure, but then the site goes chaotic very quickly with the subs. So what plans are we expecting from the contractors in relation to managing their subs specifically for parking?
Through you, Chair. Ultimately, parking is the responsibility of the contractor to find the parking within the existing curbside regulations. We cannot reserve parking for contractors on the roadway within the current framework of the traffic and parking bylaw. We obviously recognize this is a challenge within urban areas and lots of your projects, Councillor, and we do our best to work with the developers and contractors alike to find alternative solutions, but ultimately this remains the responsibility of the contractor. And at this time, we're not planning on, we'll say, prescriptively telling contractors how they have to park within a zone or within the area of their building.
Okay, in the spirit of that, and being very reactive to the day in, day out grind, are we? Do you have a contact in bylaw that once the plan is approved for construction and what is open or closed, are we able to share that with those who enforce parking? So then, because I understand the game on the ground. The game on the ground is that bylaw officer who shows up, who then the sub of sub says, well, I'm allowed to park there. But if we're able to share with bylaw what the approved plan is, it also gives them teeth on the ground to actually enforce some of those sub trades. And often, just to be clear, often the general contractor is supportive of our action. It's they're having issues managing their subs. So just want to understand clearly what's our internal process to capture the chaotic environment there.
Hi, Chair, through you, Councillor. So we work closely with parking bylaw. So when we get complaints, it depends on the area too, in terms of, they do proactively go out in certain areas of the city where, like in the market and that. So if the construction's happening there, they're in that area. If it's another area that's not necessarily there, we can work with them, especially when we start hearing complaints of those things happening, and they will go out and do that enforcement. And we do have contacts that we can call regularly if required to ensure that enforcement occurs. We also work with contractors when we see those issues to try, like Brittany mentioned, to try to work with them to see some alternative solutions for them off street. Because ultimately we can't reserve space on the road for these vehicles. It's not permitted.
I guess my question is, does bylaw parking have access to what we approve in plans? Because I see that as a big gap where, Brittany and her team do a tremendous job of managing and protecting access for pedestrians, bike, cars, whatever. But then the plan sort of collapses on this issue of parking. So are we able to ensure that bylaw is properly integrated with what's been approved at our end?
If I may, through you, Chair, and just to speak at a higher level, Bylaw is integrated in with our temporary construction encroachment process such that they have access to the permits that we issue. So they are aware of the work that's going on throughout the city and can respond.
Thanks, Rob. And they would have access to the plan that Brittany's team has approved through that?
Not necessarily, but if there are concerns, as Phil and Brittany have mentioned, then we have that link in to be able to provide them with the information quickly. And they're aware at a higher level of where the permits have been issued and where the activity is ongoing. So we have that ability to pivot quickly and respond and link in Bylaw.
Okay. I will raise that I see this as a continued issue. I think, as I said, I think there's been a lot of improvements through this report, but I see that as one of the kind of loose ends that we need to continue to monitor and stay on top of. The other one in terms of constructability relates to multiple sites near each other. We've had the case on Rideau, for example, near Cumberland intersection that's been challenging. And I wonder with this latest report on constructability, how that addresses that, because ultimately there are winners and losers. And for us, the winners need to be the public and accessing sidewalks and their bus stop and so on. And I guess I don't know how that works in the approval scheme. Would we see a refusal of a permit because of constructability, because of other nearby sites that are limiting access? I just want to understand that a bit further.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So ultimately, I think the new constructability process, because we're going to be looking at it from at an earlier stage, it's going to give us that opportunity to flag any other adjacent projects. And all site plan applications have to be renewed every 2 years. So if they haven't started construction, every 2 years, we get the opportunity to sort of look at the landscape again and re-review what projects are potentially around it, you know, geographically and from an overall impact perspective on the transportation network. So that is part of what we're trying to capture as part of that constructability. We're hoping to at least indicate some of those coordination issues at an earlier level.
Okay, yeah, that's very fair. Mr. Chair, just as a final comment, I do want to thank staff for bringing forward this report. I think it's an important one. There are a number of key measures that are moving the yardstick, which is great. I think, as per my direction, I think there are other elements to continue to look at, and I appreciate staff's willingness to do so. I would just make the following statement. Cities right of way is like your home. You wouldn't let anyone just play with your windows or damage your front door or damage your landscape. You care about your home. So as we approach into this consideration, yes, utilities have different acts, and yes, we want to make sure that development continues, but we have to be pristine to the fact that sidewalks, our roads, our bike lanes remain the city's investments, the public's investment in the transportation network. So again, a step in the right direction, but I think there's a little more that we need to do relating to protecting our home, protecting our investments. So let's stay hyper-focused, and I will be supporting the report, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Great, right down to the last couple of seconds. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to staff for putting this report together. I appreciate it. I've met on site for occasions. It's always after the fact with Brittany and Phil and team, just trying to sort out what could have been done, what should be done in the future. And they did tell me about this report coming down, and I appreciate it. It is a double whammy when you've got construction sites side by side as well. It makes it even more complicated when you've got these situations. I'd like to hear from Brittany about how this will help her in her job, because I remember our conversation about, just like, for example, just the fact that you're going to give notice to different, you're going to give notice to the counselor's office ahead of time and to the public. So that whole regime.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. It's going to be very welcome for us, right, to have the opportunity to manage these impacts proactively. And I said it previously, but I really think that oftentimes we have the opportunity to be more creative in our solutions, but we don't have the time because we're dealing with a contractor who has a shovel on the ground and we don't want to delay that work. So this will just give us that ability and that time to help make those solutions, right? So, you know, in some other words, we've actually looked at geometric modifications. So if we want a PXO and we need to do it right, we need to put in the curb depressions and the twizzies, or maybe we need an extra turn lane and a roundabout. And we need to start looking at those things with enough time to do it, not when we need it today, but they're already constructing. So I think, you know, for my team, it's been a long time coming, and I can't wait for it to be implemented because it really will help us in the future manage these impacts. And it in my opinion, it's mutually beneficial. It helps the developers when they understand the impacts on the roadway and they understand our expectations of how they need to manage that work.
Thank you very much, Brittany. I sense that very much. One of the big issues in terms of what my staff deal with is road cuts and in residential areas. And the 30-day period, I think, drives people crazy. And you're saying that still has to be implemented, where they have up to 30 days to fill in those road cuts. Is there any way we can get them to move faster on that? That's probably the thing that drives people nuts.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. And I guess I'll say at a general level that the right-of-way inspections group works actively with the permit holder to get the work done as quickly as possible. I think it's admittedly in everybody's best interest, both the community, both the permit holder, as well as the city, to have it filled in. So they do work quickly and actively in order to get that work done. But the bylaw does, as it states today, provide that 30-day window before, say, for example, we may proceed to lay a fine if the final reinstatement were completed within the window. But I will say, despite that, again, everybody's looking to have it done as quickly as possible.
I appreciate it. Is there why is it 30 days? If it's, is there any way it could be shortened? And I can't expect you to talk about bylaw, but is there any physical reason it can't be?
Councilor Kavanaugh, it's Kevin Lamer here. So on the inspection side, if I could maybe put it into context, I assume what you're referring to, a lot of the contractors, when they do the road cut, they're actively doing their particular work. They reinstate the road. Under the bylaw, what we ask them to do is complete it in a hard surface, right away. So that's what you're seeing, like, for example, temporary asphalt, probably a temporary asphalt in the sidewalk where there may have been a concrete curb that's going to be installed. And it's that delay from that component to when they come back and do the final concrete work. For example, they may grind out and then do a final lift of asphalt. Would that make sense? Is that the component or the timeline you're referring to, from when it's temporarily till final?
Yeah, it's driving over the road cuts where they're no longer, the cones are up, but and it's not filled adequately, but they still have time to do it. And people are complaining about damage to their cars, etc.
Yeah, so there's two components there. One would be in a regular seasoned year. They usually can put that final reinstatement of asphalt on the roadway as soon as they're completed the work, and then theoretically take their signage down and leave the site. In a case like that, you know, if they did things as per our standard, then it shouldn't be a particular issue unless there was a settlement that happened afterwards. Of course, that would come through a service request. We would contact our team, we'd contact the contractor and have it repaired. Also outside, and we get into the colder months, we'd look at the actual heated asphalt, if you will, not being available. So tendency is you'll see what we call a cold patch. I know roads operations uses it as well. It's very temporary asphalt that can be put down during cold weather events. That still provides that hard surface, but still will need to be grinded out and repaved with the hot asphalt. That takes place obviously in our colder months. So it could be a combination of those two that I think that you're referring to. Again, if it's the hot asphalt, definitely. If there is a concern that comes out, I would just ask that, you know, a service request come to our office. We will follow up to see what the particular issue is and make sure it does get reinstated. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I just want to give a shout out to Bylaw, who've been very helpful with the back and forth on certain projects. And I'll just add my voice in terms of infrastructure for cyclists and pedestrians is very important during construction, and not to be forgotten, and of course, accessibility. Thank you. I have to go myself, so thank you.
Terrific. Thank you for that. And seeing no further questions on this one, I do want to thank staff. They put a lot of work into this. We all experienced this as counselors, so tremendous thank you. So the two directions were also read in. So on the actual motion itself, is this item carried?
Carried.
Thank you very much, everybody. Item number 2 was held. I guess Councillor Fleury was confused on one of the items within there. Councillor Fleury, did you want to ask that question?
Yeah, I'm certainly not confused. The report says that it will come back prior to budget 22 in line with MQS. Here we are. So I guess I'm just asking for clarity on, are we changing the timelines of when we're answering that inquiry, or is there something to be expected ahead of next Transportation Committee, which I believe will be the budget deliberations? So that's specifically for the clearing of.
Yeah, there's Alain right there. Sorry, Councillor. Alain?
Yep. So, Chair, the couple of items that I wanted to point out on that one, because that is a motion that's been out there for a little while. Since the original motion, a couple of pieces I wanted to flag is that one, we have undertaken phase 1 of the service delivery review, where we've provided a lot more focus on sidewalk maintenance. We've also identified heat maps for sensitive areas of which schools are part of. So we definitely provide more attention as part of our school networks. We provided a bit of a memo update also back in September of 2020, I believe, that was addressing similar issues. And also when we brought up the update at the October 6th Transportation Committee meeting on the winter maintenance quality standards, we indicated that we were providing basically an interim update, and more details would be coming up in terms of recommendation in Q1 of or in the spring of 2022. So there will be more details provided at that point. But what I wanted to confirm with the councillor is we've certainly heard the concerns, and we've adapted a lot of our operations to be more sensitive to those areas. And further details will be coming up as part of our report next year. So hopefully that addresses some of the concerns that were raised.
Just for sake of governance here, so Alain, are you officially responding to that inquiry, or you'll respond through your report in the first quarter of 22? Just so I understand.
Yeah, the intent is definitely to respond formally through the report that we're going to be bringing up in the spring of 2022. But I wanted to provide the context that we have continued to make modifications to our operations to recognize that concern and that challenge.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Alain. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Fleury. So on item number 2, is that item received?
Received.
Perfect, thank you. We did have one more that was held. I believe Councillor Luloff. Kelly, if you can put up the 8 intersections that were part. There we go. This was the addition here. Councillor Luloff, did you want Phil Landry to read these out, or is this suffice?
Yeah, if we could just scroll through them, just so members of the committee and the public can see where these are going. I think this is a great news story in increasing safety for our vulnerable road users, especially our students. Very appreciative of the work that you did, Chair, to get these added, and the work of staff on this as well. So if we could just kind of scroll through them so that members of the public and our members of the committee can see where these are going.
Yep, they're right there on the screen right now. Oh, we actually do have questions. Councillor Dudas.
Just a matter of clarification, the one on the top is actually in Ward 2.
Good to know.
That is true. That is absolutely true.
Thank you for that clarification.
It's all in the East End. We all benefit from it. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out.
Great, and thank you very much. And Kel, I think it's been up there a while now, so if everyone's satisfied, I don't see any further questions on this item. Is this received?
Received.
Great, and forgive me, Kel, just to make sure, receiving it is fine. We don't have to obviously carry that item.
Apologies, Chair. The motion should be carried.
Okay, so on that item, is it carried?
Carried.
Great, thank you. All right, on to, we have a couple of notices of motion. First up, I believe is we got Councilman Menard. Kel, if you don't mind putting that in the screen, and then followed by that will be Councillor Kitts.
Thanks very much, Chair. I can just read out the be it resolves at this point. Essentially what the motion is asking us to do is to study free transit in the transportation master plan update. So I'll just read, be it resolved that staff study free transit as a policy tool in the TMP, including but not limited to free transit for all transit riders, free transit for transit riders 18 years of age and younger, free transit for transit riders enrolled in elementary school or high school, free transit on high congestion streets such as Bank Street, E, the savings that can come from reduced fare collection, fare enforcement, and collaboration with other orders of government, and F, the financial benefit of reducing car dependence and fully utilizing our $6.7 billion investment in transit, and that this study include both OC Transpo and Paratranspo. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you, Councillor Menard. On to Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, you may have seen last week my predecessor, now MPP Blay, introduced a private members bill at Queen's Park, calling on the province to upload Highway 174 and return it back to provincial jurisdiction. So this motion is seeking the mayor to write a letter to the premier voicing the city's support of the bill. It's cost the city millions in capital and operating expenses since it was downloaded. So staff is involved in writing this motion, and my thanks as well to Chair Turney and Councillor Lulaw for their support. I'll just read the therefores. Therefore, be it resolved that the Transportation Committee recommend council request the mayor to write to the Ontario Premier in support of the private members bill 26 to upload Ontario Road 174 back to the province on the condition that the transfer not take place until after the completion of the Stage 2 East extension to Trim Road, and be it further resolved that the mayor write to the Minister of Transportation that Bill 26 be approved. The ministry's first priority for Highway 174 be the planning, design, and construction of the Trim Road Park and Ride Parkade. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you very much, Councillor Kitts. So we'll deal with those two at the next Transportation Committee meeting. We have no further business. The next meeting will take place Monday, November 1st. Hold on. Wednesday, December 1st, 2021. And I wish everyone a beautiful sunny day today. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.